If you have watched any of the mainstream broadcast media coverage or read many of the newspaper reports about the protesters coming for Keir Starmer at Westminster last night, you would probably believe Boris Johnson had personally ordered the mob to round on the Labour leader. Of course, the opposite is true. The inconvenient reality is that this group of anti-authority protesters are just as angry with the government and would have come for the Prime Minister himself or any Tory minister if they had encountered them outside Parliament. Boris himself immediately condemned the violence, tweeting, "The behaviour directed at the leader of the opposition tonight is absolutely disgraceful. All forms of harassment of our elected representatives are completely unacceptable. I thank the police for responding swiftly." But the media witch hunt against Boris continues at pace, so facts are out the window at this point. It's all about optics, as the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Sky News, The Guardian and the Daily Mirror, well, they sent blood. In this instance, the media establishment remains deeply unhappy that while responding to the Sue Gray report, Boris raised the fact that Starmer was running the CPS at the time, but they decided not to prosecute Jimmy Savile, even though he was not personally involved in such a decision.
Leader of the opposition, a former director of public prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out, Mr. Speaker.
Johnson has come under great pressure to apologise, but has refused to do so, even when it resulted in his close ally, Munira Mirza, quitting as his policy chief. If Starmer thinks Boris should be responsible for every party that went on at number 10 Downing Street on his watch, is it wrong for the PM to expect the same standards about his rivals' past? As Tory grandee Peter Lilly put it on Newsnight.
Both sides are saying that the person at the top of the organisation is responsible for what happens further down, be it number 10 or the Department for Prosecutions. And that seems to me reasonable, but capable of being exaggerated on both sides. Both sides should probably apologise and stop making personal remarks, but they won't because this is politics.
But there is another side to this story, one you won't hear from any other broadcaster, despite their claims of impartiality. In the House of Commons, Starmer has regularly taken the credit for CPS successes. Just have a look at this.
I spent 5 years as Director of Public Prosecution prosecuting thousands of rape cases. I've prosecuted terrorists and I've prosecuted extremists. And I remind the Prime Minister, when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, I prosecuted MPs who broke the rule. Mr. Speaker, I was Director of Public Prosecutions for 5 years and spent every day prosecuting serious crime, including terrorism, sexual violence and rape. I've also prosecuted terrorists as the Director of Public Prosecutions. I prosecuted the Director of Public Prosecutions, serious terrorists, for 5 years, working with the intelligence and security forces and with the police in Northern Ireland. I remind the Prime Minister, I not only prosecuted shoplifters, I prosecuted MPs over the MPs' expenses scandal. So I stand on my record.
As the Guido Fawkes website, which put that package together so brilliantly, said, Starmer quite cynically wants to take the credit for the successes, yet we are now expected to accept he isn't responsible for the failures. So that's why I believe it is right for Boris to stand his ground and refuse to apologise. If he did so now, no one would accept it as sincere anyway. But as a result, most of the craven broadcast media won't let the issue rest, resulting in their dodgy interpretation of last night's incident. Here's what happened when Starmer encountered the protesters.
Are you a good Freemason? What's it like being a Freemason? Do you enjoy working for the New World Order? Man behind you in the post! Why did you go after
So yes, I think I heard one reference to Savile, but the hecklers are also yelling at Starmer about a host of other issues, including Julian Assange, Freemasons and the New World Order. That's not what the coverage would have led you to believe.
Now, many people in America have, of course, made a direct link between the growth of online conspiracy theories, their episodic adoption by the likes of Donald Trump, and the eventual attack on the Capitol building in Washington. And it is that, perhaps more than anything else, that makes MPs here nervous.
Police had to put the Labour leader in a car and drive him to safety after he was surrounded by protesters shouting slurs, including that he'd protected paedophiles.
As you say, those protesters were shouting traitor, and they could also be heard shouting Jimmy Savile.
The leader of a political party pursued by a mob hurling abuse about the paedophile Jimmy Savile. A scene from our street.
And in the media's parallel universe, Labour's Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves was unchallenged when making this ludicrously over-the-top attack on the Prime Minister via the BBC earlier today.
What I see is a Prime Minister with absolutely no shame. He's digged into the deepest and darkest recesses of the far right on social media and then parroted those lines in the House of Commons. It is the lowest of the low.
Ridiculous overreach. She should have been challenged by the BBC. But of course she wasn't, because they're in this together. We know that. I will state again, as I have stated time and again, all violence against our political leaders and the media must be condemned. I do so in the strongest of fashions. But it's interesting to me that there wasn't the same mainstream media outrage when newly promoted Cabinet Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg, congratulations to him today, and his young son, had to be escorted by police as Ramonas screamed at him that he was a traitor and a Nazi not all that long ago. What about this? When 5 people were arrested when Anne Duncan-Smith was attacked by a traffic cone at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester last November, just days after Angela Rayner had branded members of the Tory party scum. I'll say it again. All violence and all threats against our politicians are wrong. Sir David Amess was killed just 4 months ago. But to suggest in any way that Boris incited this rabble of hecklers is intellectually dishonest, and the media who know what they're doing should hang their heads in shame.